May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? My name is future priest Yahweh Hawkins, and I would like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services. Come down.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? Shalom, everyone. My name is future priest Jonathan Hawkins, and I want to serve you as a priest starting very soon. It is my It is my privilege and honor to present to you the future priest and priestesses now entering the sanctuary. It is my privilege and honor to present to you our first speaker, Nabai Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You may be seated. Today I'm going to be talking about keeping Yahweh's 613 laws. And we know that keeping Yahweh's 613 laws is complete perfect unity. Unity is our protection from the curses named in Matthew 24, verse 7. Let's turn over to Matthew 24, verse 7. It's on page 752. It's on page 752. Matthew 24, verse 7, it says, "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, and pestilences, and disease epidemics, and earthquakes in place after place." So there will be disease epidemics. There will be disease epidemics. Our protection comes from being in perfect unity with the one sent Yisrayl Hawkins. If we break one of Yahweh's laws, we have sinned. If you can turn over in your books of Yahweh to 1 Yochanan 3 verse 4 and verse 8 through verse 8. It's on page 965. First Yochanan 3 verse 4 through 8 says, "Whoever commits sin transgresses also the law, for sin is a transgression of the law. And you know that he was manifested to take away our sins, and in him is no sin. Whoever abides in him does not sin. Whoever sins has not seen him, neither knows him. Little children, let no man deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. He who commits sin is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of Yahweh was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Okay. So sin is the transgression of the law. If you also turn over to 1 Yochanan 2 verse 4, it's on page 964. 1 Yochanan 2 verse 4. It says, "He who says, 'I know him,' but does not keep his commandments keep his laws is a liar, and the truth is not in him." If we say we know Yahweh and do not practice sinning, we are not honest with ourselves or others. We are not honest with ourselves or others. And in Isaiah 59 verse 1 through 2 on page 567, Isaiah 59, verse 1 through 2, and it says, "Behold, Yahweh's hand is not shortened that he cannot save, nor his ear heavy that he cannot hear. But your own iniquities have separated you from your Father, and your own sins have caused him to hide his face from you. So he will not listen." We cut ourselves off from Yahweh if we sin. So let's continue forever to keep Yahweh's laws so we may be a part of the royal family of priests forever. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to future priest Shannon Hawkins for prayer.
Deacon Israel David Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. Today I'd like to speak on a topic that's going to be able to help everyone as they go back out into this world, and it's going to be on maintaining that purple character that Yahweh is building in us. And it comes from the peaceful solution, and it's maintaining that character of Yahweh. And you all should be familiar with the peaceful solutions, the analogy that it gives about maintaining your character or comparing your character to a car. You know, if you only put oil in it once or gas in it once, it's not going to run optimally for the rest of the next how many years you're supposed to have it. And it's the same way with your character. You know, you have to maintain it. You have to continually maintain those positive character traits. And really simply, it's constantly making choices that are demonstrating self-control towards yourself and others. Every day, all the time. Now that might sound a little bit complicated and a little bit hard to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down for everybody so it makes it a little bit simpler. So really the first thing that we have to do, the most important thing that we have to do out in this world today when we go back out there, is to guard your mind. If you'll turn over to Proverbs chapter 4, and it's on page 498. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. It says, "Guard your mind with all diligence." Now notice, it doesn't say just guard your mind with diligence, but it says with all diligence. That means with everything you have to guard your mind. Because this world is a crazy place, and it will feed you with so much garbage influences that it can get your values out of disarray if you don't guard your mind. So guard your mind with all diligence, for out of it flows the springs of life. The words that we say can, either make or break our position in the kingdom. Remember Yahshua said in Matthew, I believe it's 12 verse 37, by your words you will be justified, or by your words you will be condemned. So we really need to guard our mind and watch the things that we say. But we have to protect our mind from these influences and the choices that will compromise this positive purple character, which is developing the Spirit of Yahweh in us. And that's not going to be easy, Because, some of these things seem desirable to us, to this carnal nature that's within us, but it takes effort, it takes commitment, and it takes diligence and determination, and we have to do this. And the next thing that we need to remember, and the peaceful solution breaks it down very simply, is that every action that we do, that we call, mistakes, a lot of them are really bad choices, but they all begin with a thought. All our choices begin with thoughts. So we have to learn to control those thoughts, like Yeshua did. Remember, he put every thought into subjection. So you have to have your mind set in advance. You have to set your mind in advance, and that's really going to be the easiest way to protect yourself from these negative influences. So before you go back out there, if you don't have it already done, do it today. Set your mind in advance that, okay, if I see anything like this, I'm going to look the other way. I'm not even going to allow myself to get engrossed into it. Before you go out there, so that you won't fall victim to Satan's traps. And trust me, she'll put them out there right in front of you, readily available, trying to get you to, fall for them. But you have to set your mind not to be influenced to them. And then the next thing, which I mentioned earlier, is watch your thoughts. Because those thoughts lead to feelings, and those feelings lead to actions. But we've in the House of Yahweh, we've been taught how to differentiate between negative and positive thoughts. The negative ones are any thought that's going to cause harm or lead to harm to yourself, others, or the environment, or that are going to cause you to compromise your positive character. So, when we get any kind of thoughts like that, because Satan's going to try to put them in our mind, but we have to resist them. And we can resist them by replacing them with positive thoughts. Totally kicking out the negative thoughts, and then replace them with a positive thought. And that can be a House of Yahweh song. If you're thinking of a worldly song, replace it with a House of Yahweh song. Or if we're thinking of a worldly show, replace it with a scripture. Or something like that that can, get your mind thinking back in that positive direction. And then immediately, you have to do that immediately. You can't dwell on that thought for any time. Once we get that thought, we have to immediately kick it out and replace it with a positive thought. And that goes back to setting your mind in advance. Do it today. Set your mind in advance that when you go out there and something like that occurs, you're going to kick it out immediately. So if you do that, if you don't kick it out immediately and replace it, you're letting yourself down. And worse yet, you're letting Yahweh down. Okay? And that cuts you off from Yahweh. So we have to remember to do those things. Set our mind in advance while we're still here, and we have Yahweh's people around us, and, we can bounce those positive thoughts that we can replace off of each other. So do it today before you leave out. And then evaluate your choices. And that's really another very important step. Evaluate the choices that we make. Because a lot of times we make negative choices, and a lot of times even if we're, striving to make those positive choices, we'll be stressed out, we're working hard, maybe we're not thinking on our feet kind of correctly that morning, and then someone says something to us, and you're like, wait, he just called me what? And then, you automatically want to say something negative back to him. But that's when that setting your mind in advance comes into play. Because you have to replace those those negative thoughts really quickly with those positive thoughts. And that's when that setting your mind comes into advance, and you have to have forgiveness. And you can't retaliate. Because when you retaliate, you go back home that night and you think on that and you're like, that was really foolish what I did earlier. Then you get to go back and find everybody and apologize to them. And you really end up hurting yourself more than you help yourself if you retaliate. So it's really foolish to retaliate. So you have to let it go and, learn to forgive the person. And it's not going to be easy at first, because that carnal nature in you is going to want to fight back, but you have to keep practicing it. Set your mind in advance and practice it. Set that as a goal, to never slip up on that. And then, it'll become easier as time progresses. And then, all of us are going to make mistakes. There's going to be times when we slip up and make mistakes, but you can't beat yourself up with it. You have to take those mistakes, use them as stepping stones, and learn from them. And set your mind in advance that since you made that mistake, now you can figure out, take it home and write it down, a way that you're never going to fall trapped to that mistake again. And then the next time something like that occurs, you'll have a plan to work it out. That's how you can use that as a stepping stone. But never beat yourself up about a mistake. You have to be determined to learn from it and move forward. Now, those are just some really quick ways that when you go back out into this world, you can maintain that purple positive character that Yahweh is developing in us. And you know, it's really sad to see that everyone has to go back out there. But it's a joy to know that, you know, Yahweh gives us the tools that we can use to avoid everything Satan sets out for us. Praise Yahweh. You know, remember Yahweh said He's never going to put something upon us that we can't bear. So, I really look forward to seeing all of you next feast. And it was a great opportunity to see everybody this feast. It was really, really great. So, you know, every one of you, you're in Yahweh's house. So remember that when you go back out into this world, that, you know, you have to be an example to the people in the world. You can't fall back into, you know, the same traps that are out there into the world. You know, you are Yahweh to the people in the world. And, you know, so you have to be that Yahweh to the people in the world. If you'll all please stand. I'd like to turn it over to the next speaker, the great Kahan David DePass Hawkins.
Praise God. Okay. You may be seated. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. And it's truly a great honor to address the great called out ones of Yahweh. You know, Genesis 1 verse 26 tells us that Yahweh's plan requires for us to have His golden character written in our hearts and in our minds so that we could become His royal sons and daughters. Now, we know what character is. Character is a combination of morals and beliefs. And when we came first to the house of Yahweh, we came with the morals and beliefs that we acquired from this deceived world. So, brethren, with that in mind, this is what I really want to address here today. What I'd like to do is to issue a warning concerning one of those false beliefs that many brought with them in the house of Yahweh. And this belief has to do with the worldly understanding of idolatry. This understanding has caused many to believe that the drawing or carving out of a white buffalo or a donkey, or the two witnesses on the ark, that things like these is idolatry, or the great respect and honor that we show the servant of Yahweh. And this has been embedded in the psyche, in the deep psyche of our many minds, brethren. And it can be dangerous. The point that I want for you to understand and for you to remember today is that we are to trust the testimonies of Yahweh, not our own understanding. Okay? Trust the testimonies of Yahweh, not our own understanding. You might want to start turning to page 820 in your books of Yahweh. Because holding on, brethren, to our own understanding instead of the teachings that we get from the one sent will prevent us from having Yahweh's character, His morals and beliefs from being written in our heart and mind. And that's serious. If Yahweh's character cannot be written in our heart and mind, then we're not part of His plan. Do you remember the struggles that Yeshua had to deal with the Yadaim at the time when He was here on the earth? They considered that what He did on the Sabbath, the various things he did on the Sabbath, healing on the Sabbath, was breaking the Sabbath. But that came from their own understanding. You see? The Jews in Brooklyn, they think the same thing. They all of what the Savior had to deal with back then was brought way down here to the last days. They even think Pastor breaks the Sabbath because he drives his car on the Sabbath. I know I remember having a conversation like that with one of them. In fact, a couple examples here of how their understanding of the Sabbath. One Friday, just before sunset, myself and a deacon, this was back in the 90s, as I, not too long came to the House of Yahweh, went to hand out flyers. And we went into a high-rise building in Williamsburg, which is a Jewish neighborhood. And we went in the elevator, and all the buttons on the elevator was pressed. Why is that? Because nobody should be pressing the buttons on the Sabbath. So the elevator stopped on every floor. Another incident was when, with one of our brothers, he lives in a Jewish neighborhood, so he has a Jewish family living right beside him. And on the Sabbath, this man walked over, opened his gate, walked up the steps, across the porch, knocked on the door. And when the brother opened the door, he said, "My son is sick." So you get puzzled. Why did he have to do that? Well, because he couldn't call 911 on the Sabbath. So what I'm talking about here today with the idolatry is similar to that, because we come with our own thoughts. We come with the ideas that we got from this deceived world. And it colors the way we see things. What I want to draw your attention to is how Yeshua suggested to the Yadayim how to resolve this issue now. Right? What did he suggest that we do? You have any ideas? It has to do with the title that I just gave. Trust in the testimonies of Yahweh, not your own understanding. In Yachanan 5, verse 37, notice what it says there. It says, "And the Father himself," in verse 36, and this is page 820, in verse 36, he mentioned Yachanan, the immerser, okay, who was a well-known person at the time. But here he went down to, and the Father himself. That's like, you know what they say, you hear it from the horse's mouth. All right? Because Yahweh, you can't get no higher than Yahweh. Right? Who has sent me testifies on my behalf. And why is that important? Because Yahweh is the most credible and highest authority we have, higher than any rabbi, higher than Thayers, higher than Gesenius. It doesn't matter, right? In Romans 3 verse 4, what does it say? It says, and you don't have to turn there, but you can put it in your notes. Let Yahweh be true and every man a liar. Okay, think about that. Even if that man is us, right? And the beliefs that we brought into the House of Yahweh. In Hebrews 6 verse 18, it says, "It is impossible for Yahweh to lie." That's his credential. You see that? That's his credential. Our understanding is simply what Satan's deceived world has taught us. That's the understanding that we came into the House of Yahweh with. Do you want to hold on to teachings that you got from a liar?
No.
Or from a person who cannot lie? Think about it. In Luke 16 verse 17, notice what additional it said here. But it's easier for heaven and earth to pass away, than for one yod of the law and the prophets to fail, or the testimonies of Yahweh to fail, right? This is why we can trust, and we must trust in the testimonies of Yahweh and not our own understanding. This is very important. This is the key to the kingdom, brethren. So continuing in Yachanan 5, in verse 38, it says, nor do you have his words dwelling in you. Notice what he's saying, his words, his teachings, his beliefs in you, right? Because whom he sent, him you did not believe. You do not believe. So you see what he's saying here? In order to have Yahweh's words dwelling in us, which is what we are striving for. We are striving for Yahweh's laws to be written in our hearts and minds. In order for that to take place, we must believe him who he has sent. Do you see that? I don't want you to miss that, brethren. Now, how are we going to determine that we can trust what is taught here in the house of Yahweh? Notice verse 39, it says, search the scriptures. And why are we searching the scriptures? We're searching the scriptures to find out whom Yahweh is going to send in our day. And then we should learn from that person. All right? That's what it's saying. And Isaiah 34 verse 16 said the same thing. It says, search out the book of Yahweh and read. Not one of these will be neglected. Yahweh's not going to oversleep. And yet, oh, I forgot. Oh, man. No. He's not going to do that. It says none of these testimonies that he made, pronouncements that came out of his mouth, is going to be neglected. And we can trust in that because remember, Yahweh cannot lie. Okay? For his mouth has commanded it. Now, let's go and search out the book of Yahweh, following the instructions of the Savior. Okay? And see what it says about the last day's witness, our pastor and teacher, Yisrayl Hawkins. Okay? Because remember, some have accused him of idolatry because of the things that I just mentioned. Okay? Notice in Genesis 49 verse 1. It sets the timing here in the last days. Okay? That's the context of this chapter. The last days. In verse 10, it tells us that the scepter, and that's on page 43. Okay? The scepter will not depart from Yada, nor a ruling staff, lawgiver, from between his feet, until he comes to whom tribute belongs, and obedience of the nation is his. In Genesis 49, verse 11, it says, tethering his donkey to the vine, and the vine is identified as Yeshua, right? That's in Yachanan 15, verse 5. He says, I am the vine. And tethering his donkey is called to the choicest branch. Now, what is tethering? What is tethering? That's important. I don't have a dictionary definition. I went Googling it, and it came up with, it's what occurs between two devices, like whether a computer or a phone, and sharing the data. So I found that to be interesting because we are sharing data, right, between the one sent and ourselves. But since part of this prophecy already took place, right, the tethering of the vine to the donkey, we have a better definition than any book could tell us what tethering is, okay? Because all of what took place between the disciples and the Savior is tethering, okay? And that's exactly what is taking place between pastor, okay, the branch, okay, and the donkey's colt. You see what I mean? When Yeshua said, if you see me, you've seen the Father. The same thing occurs here between the branch and the donkey's colt. When Kepha said, do you love me more than these? Isn't that the same thing we do when we when we do the ear rolling? Okay? Do you love the house of Yahweh more than all else? You see that? When yesterday you see the joy and the rejoicing that went on here, okay, on the stage, in this room, okay, when we were cheering for Pastor and we were rejoicing, that is part of the tethering, brethren. That's part of the tethering. But you know, those that critique and do not understand, do not have Yahweh's word in them, see that as idolatry. But Yahweh, and this is who we must trust, the testimonies of who we must trust. We must trust the testimonies of Yahweh. What Yahweh calls it is tethering. And at the end of it, at the end of this tethering, what is it supposed to achieve? Well, I can't find the scripture here, but it says, who will separate us from the love of the Messiah? Will tribulation, will distress, all these things at the end of this tethering, that is what it's supposed to produce, brethren. And who's performing the tethering? Who's performing it? Do we have stenographers here? Because this is like a court, right? Everybody should be writing. Well, let the record show that when this prophecy was made, neither the donkey, the vine, the donkey's colt, or the branch was alive. See that? These were the words of Yahweh that came out of his mouth, right? And he's going to be the one to perform this. That's why we can trust in the testimonies of Yahweh, not our own understanding. Now, this word branch identifies one of the two witnesses, as mentioned in Zechariah 4 verse 12, and that's on page 718. I want you to take a note, take a look at this verse, page 718, Zechariah 4 verse 12. It says, what are these two olive branches, which through the two golden pipes empty the golden oil through them? Notice that. What is Yahweh saying is going to be emptied? He said golden oil. But when these critics read that, what they're thinking it was lard. Okay? All right? But it's not lard. It didn't say lard. It said golden oil. You see that? So you want to tell me that golden oil includes idolatry? Huh? Absolutely not. Or breaking of the Sabbath? No. No, brethren, we can trust these testimonies of Yahweh. Okay? Were these words neglected? No. No. Okay? Do you see what I'm saying here, brethren? Trust in the testimonies of Yahweh, not your own understanding. Now, who did the branches, who did Yahweh say the two olive branches are, and what are they going to be doing? In verse 14 of the same chapter, it says, then he said, these are the two anointed ones who stand for the supreme ruler of the whole earth. Whoa. They stand for the supreme ruler of the whole earth. How on earth could this be true if the choicest branch is teaching idolatry and breaking the Sabbath? We should ask these questions when we read these things. You see that? Do you want to fulfill prophecy, brethren? All right, look at chapter Zechariah 9, verse 9. That's on page 721. Okay? Let's visualize this prophecy here. And notice what it says. Rejoice greatly. Just like what you see took place yesterday. Right? Rejoice greatly, O daughters of Zion. Shout for joy, O daughters of Jerusalem. Behold, your king comes to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. When was the rejoicing supposed to start, really? You know when the rejoicing is supposed to start? When Yahweh sent his first prophet. Some of them called minor prophets. Okay? And certainly when you see the colt, when you see the donkey, you can start rejoicing right then, because you know the king is right on his way. You see that? In Matthew 21 verse 7, notice this here. It says, they brought the donkey and the colt. That's page 748. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them, and he sat on both of them. You see, the last part of this this prophecy here was just symbolically fulfilled by Yeshua, but it's the last part of it is being fulfilled right now. It's being fulfilled right now because Yeshua is now riding the colt, okay? And he's on the colt, riding the colt, and he has as a harness the branch. So if he wants the colt to go over here and teach a piece of solution, he just go like this on the branch, okay? And the colt will go and teach a piece of solution. And that's the symbolic riding of the donkey. And the colt, it's being fulfilled right now. He's directing everything done in the house of Yahweh, including the white buffalo, the 6th and 7th works represented on the ark, the vouchers, the preparing of food on the Sabbath, doing Yahweh's work on the Sabbath to facilitate the lessons being done. All of this work of the vine is being done by the colt, which is tethered or binded to the branch. You see that? But more than that, brethren, it's Yahweh's words being fulfilled. You see, just as he declared thousands of years ago. And if you don't believe it, then you're saying that Yahweh is a liar, or he's sleeping, he forgot. You think, people think that they know what idolatry looks like, and brethren, we don't know squat. You see? Everything done in the house of Yahweh points to Yahweh and therefore glorifies Yahweh. That's the point, right? Everything you see, right? It doesn't point to no gods. There is no reverence of the gods here. Let me ask you a question. Is simply carving something out idolatry? No. I want you to turn to page 285. Page 285. That's 1 Kings, and we're going to start reading in verse 18. 1 Kings, verse 18. It says, then the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. Verse 19. The throne had 6 steps, and its back. This is Solomon's throne, by the way. Just, we're kind of breaking into the thought here. And its back had a rounded top. On both sides of the seat were armrests, with a lion standing beside each armrest. So there we have a lion sculpted out on each armrest. 12, verse 20, 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, one at either end of each step. Nothing like this, think about this now, this is what the scripture says, nothing like this had ever been done for any other kingdom. So, did Solomon sin here for his lion sculptures? Who inspired Solomon to place sculptures of lions on his throne? Who did that? It says, nothing like this has ever been done. Okay? Who is the true heir of Solomon's throne? Who is the true heir of Solomon's throne? If you turn to, by the way, I had this here and I forgot to actually show you what was described here in the throne. You see the lions on the steps, on the 6 steps, and as his arm rests right here. That's a depiction that I found. Revelations 5 verse 5. Let's take a look at that. Page 974. Page 974. And you're going to see who's actually inspiring this. Okay? It says, Revelation 5 verse 5, it says, "But one of the elders said to me, 'Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has overcome to open the scroll and release the 7 seals.'" So who's that? Yeshua. Yeshua is the lion. Israel is the white buffalo. Come on. What's the problem? A lion opens the seal for a donkey. Praise Yahweh. Shucks. Praise Yahweh. It wasn't idolatry. You see that? And it's Yahweh who's been doing this. Yahweh's running this. You see it? Now, let me ask you a question. Is it idolatry to honor Yahweh's representative like we would Yahweh himself?
No. No.
To make this clearer, let me just say this. What do you think? I'm going to give you two scenarios real quick. What do you think would give President Obama more pleasure? Scenario number one, if when he sends Secretary of State John Kerry on a mission in the Middle East, they roll out the red carpet for him, have a nice banquet, okay, for him, and when he spoke, they listened attentively to everything he's saying, okay, and at the end of it, they agree and are obedient to what he said, such that Hamas stopped firing rockets and Israel stopped targeting and firing their missiles into Palestine, right? And he came home and fulfilled all the policy objectives of the president. That's one scenario, okay? Scenario number two, when Kerry, Secretary Kerry landed over there, they never put out the red carpet for him. Okay, in fact, they had a whole lot of birds, and he's picking them off of his foot. And then when they had a banquet for him, they had this big fat pig, right there, right? And then when he went to talk to them, somebody thrust a shoes, it almost hit him in the head. You know, I mean, you had to duck, okay? And then he had to leave on the cover of night. Al Qaeda and them people was trying to break in to get him. He had to. So you had these two scenarios. Which one do you think President Obama would have more pleasure in? The first one. Come on. In Matthew 22, verse 1 to 6, it says, "The kingdom of Yahweh is compared to a certain king who gave a wedding feast for his son. And he sent out servants to summon those who were invited, but they would not come." They wouldn't come. They had more important things to do. They didn't respect and honor the ones sent, and threatened them, treated them poorly, eventually kill them, okay, kill some of them, and eventually kill his son, okay? That is exactly, this should teach us a lesson here, brethren. So, my time is almost over here. And the last scripture that I have for you is Yachanan 1 verse 12. Because we are wanting to be Yahweh's royal sons and daughters, right? But notice what it says here. It says, but as many as receive him, by receiving the servants he sent, that's how we receive him, okay? To those he gave authority to become sons and daughters of Yahweh, to those who believe the testimony of Yahweh. That's the criteria. That's the criteria, brethren. That's the key. Okay? Believing in the testimonies of Yahweh, not our own understanding. All right? So with that, may Yahweh bless your understanding. And if you all please stand, I welcome a great priest in Yahweh's house, the great Khan Abimboa.
Praise Yahweh. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may all be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one. Today, I'm going to be speaking on changing your genes, through righteousness. Our great overseer has been, speaking about this, over and over and over again. And I just thought I should, maybe bring the scientific Oki's point of view on this. So we're going to turn quickly to, if you will, to Yashub 38, verse 3. And it says, now stand up and prepare yourselves like a man, for I will question you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. It says, who determined the dimensions of the earth, if you know? Who stretched the measuring line across it? Okay, Yahweh made everything. So Yahweh knows every detail about everything he made. And Yahweh reveals these things to his servants. And in these last days, he sent to us the one sent who is teaching us all of these things, showing us all of these great secrets that is shown to no one else, apart from the house of Yahweh in these last days. So a number of things we're going to be speaking about today, will shed a lot of light on some of the things we've been hearing over and over and over again. So if we turn to Deuteronomy 18, verse 18, that's on page 162. Says, I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. Whoever will not listen to my words, which he speaks in my name, I will judge him for it. And, of course, because he speaks according to Yahweh's laws, and Israel in these last days is teaching us exactly what Yahweh says to teach us. He is the voice of Yahweh we're hearing in these last days. So he says it's possible for us to change our genes. Truly speaking, left to me, I don't need any scientific backup to believe that. He tells me I can change my genes. It shows me how I can do it through righteousness. I'm going to go ahead and do that, so that I can get the benefits of it. So, and he also told us that everything is made out of microbes, we and everything else. And we're going to take a look at some of those exciting little bugs or critters or creatures or whatever you want to call them. And, everything is made out of these microbes, and if we turn quickly Genesis 2, that's on page 2. If we look at verses 7 to 9, 7 and 9. It says here, and Yahweh formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. And, breath here, is Yahweh's inspiration, intellect, learning, leading, and spirit is the 613 laws. And it says in verse 9, and out of the ground Yahweh made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and desirable for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of right and evil was in the midst also. And of course, out of the ground refers to these microorganisms. Eretz, the ground, refers to these microorganisms. And this is just to show that all of these microbes, maybe we should just get to see some of them maybe a little bit up close. Now, those are skin cells, just magnified a few hundred times. And you can see some of these micro kingdoms, like right here. Oh, now that's the diagram of the tongue right here. Okay? And then you can see here some of the cells in the tongue that help us to be able to taste food, enjoy food, and enjoy flavors and so on. You have them right there. Taste fibers, and you have the gustatory hair and the taste pore through which, we perceive, taste. And of course, this is a closer diagram of each of those taste pores, and then the micro kingdoms that are at work in there, without which we will not be able to enjoy life. And these cells here are cells from the cheek. That's the cheek of the human. That's what these ones here are. They are kind of flattened, to be able to go on the cheek. And in the middle of that, you see those oblong shapes there, right in the middle, like right here, and like right here, and like right here. Those are the nucleus. And we're going to speak a bit more about that. And of course, this represents the DNA molecule. Well, this is called a double helix. So we're going to speak a little bit more about that as we go along. But here are the micro kingdoms, or some of the micro kingdoms in the ear. In our ears, we're able to hear because of these things. They call them hair cells. They're in the ears. And, and they look beautiful, don't they? And here we have in our eyes, various micro kingdoms. You have the rods, this one's right here. And then this here with the sharp head here, they're called cones, without which we will not be able to see colors and, be able to see things. And they come in various layers of various types of cells, ganglion cells, and so on, that help us to be able to see things. That's why you can see me and I can see you. These micro kingdoms. And of course, this is the skin. If you cut it through, a section through the skin showing, various layers of the skin and the micro kingdom. Like I said, those little dots you see there, those are the nucleus. Each of the cell has the nucleus, which contains the DNA. We'll speak more about that as we go along. And of course, we have in our blood, the red blood cells right there, and of course the white blood cells, the monocytes, the eosinophils, they have all kinds of names, but they serve to, the red blood cells serve to transport oxygen to all other cells, like a transport mechanism to carry oxygen to all other cells. And then those other ones help to protect us from disease, from infection. And of course, red blood cells are closed up. And even the bones. This is the cell of the bones. They're a little bit dense now, but I'm sure we can make out this outline here, So, and there are other ones bordering it, but I'm just concerned about this one in the middle. And you can see right here in the middle here, you can see it also has, so that's the bone there. And right here is the nostrils. In the nose, we're able to perceive smells because of these micro kingdoms right here. We call this layer the olfactory epithelium right there. And then you have nerves and so on, taking the sensation to the brain. The brain interprets the kind of smell and then sends it back, then you're able to feel or to perceive, that smell. Of course, the sense of smell and the sense of taste work together too. And this is what inside of the brain looks like when it's magnified, many thousands of times. Now, these are neurons, all right? These are brain cells in the brain. And of course, Pastor was speaking about the motor neuron. And this is what a motor neuron looks like. It's elongated, then, it has those things like hairs or spikes at the end of it with which it connects to other cells so they can pass information from one cell to another, And of course, this lower end here goes to the effector organ, could be the muscle. So that's why we're able to bend our arms and so on, like he was explaining yesterday. So these are neurons. So now, like I pointed out, in the middle of each cell, could be the neuron, could be, any cell, you have the nucleus. Now, in the nucleus, you have the genetic material, chromosomes. And usually, the chromosomes are just, DNA molecules, long strands of DNA molecule wound together. Like a thread. Like you buy a thread for sewing, You know, there's the plastic tube in the middle or a cardboard tube in the middle, and the thread is wound around it. Okay, and in that same way, the DNA molecule is wound around what we call histone proteins. Histone proteins, you know, that's why we call it chromosomes. You know, usually they're not very visible unless you stain them under the microscope, but that's how it goes. Now, if you look at some of these, this DNA, you know, the DNA, they are made up of bases, you know, which we're going to look at also in greater detail. You know, of course, humans have about maybe 50 to 70 trillion cells. You know, we have trillions of these microkingdoms in our bodies, and each of these have the exact same type of DNA. But the question then is, why are the cells in the ears different from the cells, you know, in the skin, or the cells in the cheek, or, you know, the cells in the brain? You know, they all start out, you know, from conception, from a few cells, and as they grow, you find there's differentiation. You know, all of them, you know, start to take up their responsibilities. And, you know, each one standing in its place, governed by law. You know, so they do what they're supposed to do, unless we make them sick, of course, and then, you know, we upset the entire balance. So we're made up of microbes, and all of these microbes have a nucleus in the middle, and each nucleus contains the chromosomes, which is the DNA molecule that is wound around the protein called histone. And we have genes also. Genes are segments of DNA that code for a particular characteristic. You know, like you're tall, you're short, you're fair-skinned or dark-skinned or blue-eyed or brown-eyed. You know, all of those are coded for by genes. And that's the basic heritable unit that can be passed on from parent to the next generation, carrying these characteristics to the next generation. Now, all of these genes, there's something peculiar about them. Before now, it was thought that, oh, it was absolute. You know, it was absolute. You couldn't do anything about them. Yes, certain aspects of it, yes. But you'll find that you can actually change your genes. And why can you change your genes? There are about 25,000 of those genes in our bodies as human beings. And we can change them because we have what you call epigenetic markers. Epigenetic markers. Now, there are a number of things I'm going to try to, you know, like make it as easy to visualize as possible. You know, I thought I'll have a few videos, but I couldn't get any real videos in this. But, you know, but just as genes provide, you know, the codes that determine how we're going to look, you know, how our characteristics will look like, you know, they can also be altered. Before now, like I said, we were told that, you know, you couldn't do any of that. But there are epigenetic markers. These epigenetic markers, they call them epi because they kind of sit outside of the genes, you know. But they have the ability to switch on or switch off the genes to determine which genes get expressed, which ones don't get expressed. I'm going to explain it with a few examples, a few experiments that have been done, and what the results of those experiments are to prove that those genes can actually change, you know. And many of the stuff that we've been hearing from science is not actually entirely true. So these genes can actually be changed by these epigenetic markers. And you can think of them like dials on like a TV set or maybe a radio set. You know, there's a broadcast. Now, the broadcast you can change, but you can determine how the broadcast is represented to you. If you want to turn down the volume, or you want to increase the contrast, or you want to, you know, add more color to it, or whatever it is you want to do, you could do those with the dials and the knobs and the controls you have on your set. So that's how exactly this is. So you can actually change how a gene is expressed. You can change how a gene is expressed, you know, because of these epigenetic markers, you know. Like I was saying, that all cells contain the exact same kind of, DNA, but you find that they look different and they do different jobs, you know, and so on and so forth. So these epigenetic markers, they are basically a set of instructions that tell the genes, you know, when to start acting or when to, you know, to slow down, or whether, maybe to never even, you know, express itself. If a gene is there and is not expressed, you know, you're not going to see the effect, but it doesn't mean the gene is not there. Okay? So this is what I mean. We have what we call genotype, which is your entire genetic makeup, you know, your genotype. We have phenotype, which refers to your characteristics, how you look. You know, that's whether you're tall or dark or or short or whatever. That's phenotype. That talks about appearance. All right. So many times, not all the genes contained in a person's genome is expressed. Some of them will be expressed, some of them will not be expressed, some of them will shut down, some of them, and so on and so forth. And this has a lot of impact on outlook, outcomes in life. And we're going to see a little bit more of that as we go on. But let's understand that these epigenetic markers, they can tell the cell, or they tell the genes when to start working or when to quit working. They can, help to adjust. So basically, you're adjusting this whole thing. And let's look at an experiment that was done. We call it lactose starvation. They had this E. coli, which we're all familiar with by now. E. coli, they had one, the strain is FC40, the E. coli FC40 strain, which actually does not have the ability to process lactose, which is milk sugar. So what they did in this experiment was to put the E. coli in a medium that was rich in lactose. In other words, if it wanted to get its carbon supply, it had to depend on the lactose for the source of carbon and source of energy. So that left it with no other choice, to die out or to find a way of surviving. And they found after a few days, the E. coli strain, which did not have, the capacity to actually ferment the lactose, began to do so. And it proliferated. By the time they checked, they found that the genes had been altered. It could actually now ferment the lactose. Okay? Now, so this is one example. With and this was by a Foster PL. This was published in the year 2000 in Adaptive Mutation. Published in Bioassays, a professional journal, Bioassay, volume 22, number 12, on pages 1067 and 1074. That's where this research was contained. But the bottom line is it proved beyond doubt that it's possible to change genes as you go. And that is why you look at two identical twins. They're supposed to share exactly the same kind of genetic makeup. But as they go through life, you find that sometimes they look differently. They behave differently. They like different things. Things just begin to, to differentiate as they grow older. That's because they experience different things in life and, probably eat different types of food, and all of this is going to have impact. What kind of thought patterns do they have? And so on. Yes, even thoughts have a role to play. Emotions have a role to play. But we're going to get to that point, though. But you find that identical twins, in the end, don't look so identical at the end of the day. There are differences between them. And if genes were absolute and couldn't be changed, then the identical twins should come out the exact same way. Taste, everything, lifestyle, all of that should be determined. But you find that as you go along, certain changes are made to their genetic makeup, and then they take their different paths in life. Okay? So that's an example. Now, in a new research from Emory University, Emory is popular now because of the CDC and the Ebola. So at the Emory University in Atlanta, they showed that it's possible for some information to be passed on from one generation to another. For example, you could pass on memories. You could pass on phobias, that is fears for certain things, from one generation to another generation. And here they used, they used rats in this experiment. And there are many variations of this experiment, though. In one variation, they used, cherry blossom, the smell of cherry blossom. They induced the fear of that smell in the rat by associating that smell with some stress, with a kind of stressful situation. For example, you could add electric shocks. And every time you release the smell of the cherry blossom into the environment where the rat is or the mouse is, you apply some electric shock, which the mouse doesn't like. So the mouse begins to associate the smell with danger or with stress, with discomfort. And before you knew it, that was registered in the genes of the mouse, that the next generation, which you call the F1 generation, and the F2, which is the generation after that, they found that they had this increased tendency to start being startled once the smell of cherry blossom is, released into the environment where they are, although they were never part of the experiment. I hope I'm making it a bit clear. So as we go along, you'll find that certain changes can be made to the way genes are expressed and can be made to our genes as we go along. These are basic experiments. We're going to go on to what righteousness is going to do very shortly. But this is just to prove a point right here, that it's possible to change your genes as you go along. And there's, and also, there is Patrick McGowan and a number of other scientists, carried out some research. And in the report they published, the title is Diet and the Epigenetic Reprogramming of Phenotypic Differences in Behavior. Like I said, phenotype is, how we end up looking, all right? That's the appearance. They call it to use biological terms, they say morphology. That is the form and form. That is the form of a thing, the shape, the form, and the way it is. So the title here is Diet and the Epigenetic Reprogramming of Phenotypic Differences in Behavior. Phenotypic differences in behavior. University of Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. Was published in the journal Brain Research. Volume. I think it's volume 12, number 37 of 2008, and that was on page 12 to page 24. And this phenotypic diversity is shaped by, that is, how we look, how we think, how we behave. All of this is shaped by both epigenetic, like I said, those factors that help to change our genes. Now, when I say epigenetic, I mean these factors are already built in there. In other words, the cells already have that capacity for the genes to change. I hope I'm making some sense. Those factors, those epigenetic factors are already there. Okay? They only wait for certain conditions to get them to start working. Environmental conditions, experiences, even thought patterns and so on. So basically what you practice, what influences you allow into your lives, all of those go a long way to determine what the epigenetic markers will do. It could change your genes for the better or change it for the worse, depending on what path we choose to take. So, of course, it even is implicated in certain types of diseases too, certain types of disorders. That's, epigenetics. If the genes have become damaged, and these changes can be passed on from one generation to another. That's the sad part of it. So it doesn't end with us. When we don't choose the right path and then we get our genes changed negatively, we're going to pass it on to the next generation. So, 2-3 generations down the line, one may be having children or great-grandchildren who never knew about the nasty lifestyle of their great-great-great-grandfather, who are coming down with all kinds of conditions. So all of these things can be, of course, and we can always upgrade it by improving it with righteousness, as we will see shortly. So phenotypic diversity is shaped by both genetic as well as epigenetic mechanisms, that is processes. Genetic and epigenetic, of course we know what genetic means, to do with genes. When it's epigenetic, it has to do with genes, but it is not part of the genes. It's a different factor that is sitting on top of the genes that is able to cause the genes to change, cause the way the genes are expressed to change, So these appearances and how things look, how we behave, what kind of things we like, what kind of things we're afraid of, and so on and so forth, all of them are actually determined by these genetic and epigenetic factors. They program specific patterns of gene expression. Like I said before, they determine how the gene is expressed. Let me give an example of what I mean by expression of a gene. Let us say that a person has very tall parents. But the grandparents are not so tall. So you will expect that, both father and mother, they're very tall, so the child should be tall as well, right? But if the gene for shortness from the grandparents now, if that is passed on, of course it will be passed on to this child. If that gene is expressed and the gene for tallness is suppressed, then you're going to have a situation where the child is not so tall, not as tall as the parents. In other words, the gene for tallness is there, but it's not expressed. But the carryover gene for shortness is that one which is expressed. All right? So that's what I mean by expression of genes. So cells, including neurons that we saw before, brain cells and the motor neurons, they also undergo these epigenetic changes, this epigenetic reprogramming. So we could, send defects from one generation to another generation in this manner, as we can always also transfer or accumulate, because it accumulates over time through generations. All right? So it says, cells, including neurons, undergo massive epigenetic reprogramming during development through modifications to chromatic structure and by covalent modifications of the DNA, which is the number of processes. But the idea is the DNA can be modified. That's the bottom line there. So there is evidence that these changes are sensitive to environmental influences such as maternal behavior, diet, if we go around eating pigs and rodents or lard, or we go about eating clean, oaky foods, all of that's going to have an impact. Leading to sustained differences in phenotype. That is how we turn out, behavior as well as in shape and so on and so forth. Of course, behavior refers to character in this case. So there is a Dr. Bruce Lipton, a PhD stem cell biologist and a best-selling author of The Biology of Belief. That's the book he wrote. And other notable epigenetic researchers all around the world. They've shown through their research that environmental signals which also include thoughts and emotions, thoughts and emotions directly affect DNA expression. Our thoughts and our emotions, which is one very important reason why we have to keep those thoughts positive. We have to keep those emotions under control, because all of these directly affect our DNA. And these changes, remember, will not stop at our generation, but we go on to the very next generation. So the children who don't even know how it came about, they stand a risk. Of course, if they choose righteousness, then they can turn this around too. That's the mercy of Yahweh. So these mechanisms that govern gene expressions, or by which we change our genes, are referred to as epigenetic, like I said. And, so by now, let me just tell you in a nutshell what epigenetics refers to. It refers to heritable modifications, that is, modifications that can be inherited to our DNA, to the DNA as well as the proteins that are associated with the DNA. Remember I spoke about histone proteins earlier on. So that's one of the proteins that can be modified. So by modifying these things, like I said, like a number of dials on the TV set, on the radio set, you can actually determine what the outcome is going to look like. In other words, we have some measure of control. If we choose righteousness, then we have the measure of control to change our genes to genes of righteousness. And if we choose wickedness, we have a measure of control to reduce the quality of our genes, to destroy those genes that pass on these defective genes to the next generation. All right? Now, there are several epigenetic mechanisms, like I mentioned before, but two are the most important and the most studied. That the mechanisms through which, these genes can actually be changed. That's the epigenetic mechanisms. And I said the two most studied ones, although I mentioned it in passing before, is DNA methylation. That is when you add methyl, M-E-T-H-Y-L, methyl, you add methyl groups to the DNA. In other words, these things are not just, that they have physical basis is the point I'm making. There are actual physical changes that take place at that level, at that genetic level, when, depending on what we practice. So that could add a methyl group to it. There is also modification of the histone proteins through, other chemical processes that take place right there. The histone modification that I spoke about. And these processes accumulate throughout a person's lifetime. And like I said, it can be passed on to the next generation, and we can find more information on this on Epigenomics, which is published by, Laura B. It was in 2008. That's Epigenomics, the new tool in studying complex diseases. It was published in Nature Education, volume 1, number 1, on page 178. Now, and that goes to show that a lot of outcomes in our lives sometimes are not things that, like the curses that they pass through generations, up to the 4th generation, of those who do not repent. Of course, like I said, if you choose to make a turn, you can actually change your genes to where, it'll be better. You keep improving it to where you're able to practice righteousness always, and there are a lot of attendant benefits to it. There is health, there is joy, and there's abundant living, and, to add to all of those. So this sequence of DNA, like I said, that can be changed. How do we change them? I said before that emotions have a role to play. What our environment And the environment will include sound, will include people we interact with, will include food. When I say sound, I mean what we hear. Do we listen to music that promotes violence? It directly affects our DNA. Do we watch movies that do not promote righteousness? Directly affects our DNA. Or do we listen to sermons by Pastor Yisrayl Hawkins? That affects our DNA, but positively affects it to where, yes, it upgrades it. So if we want to change our DNA for the better, we have to do all of those things that we've been asked to do, from cleansing to taking those supplements. Remember, diet is important. We have to quit eating unclean food or anything that has a trace of uncleanness in it, because every little bit adds to it a little bit. It just keeps advancing us to the negative side. And every little bit of righteousness we do also takes us to the positive side. And that's just the way it is. None of it gets lost. It goes down there to affect the DNA. It's going to affect us right now, and it's going to affect the children that are coming next. And that's the way, that's if we have time for that. So if we go to 1 Kepha on page 959, 1 Kepha 3:11-12. I know my time is, that's page 959. 11-12. If you want to change your DNA, it says here, let him turn away from evil and do righteousness. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of Yahweh are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of Yahweh is against those who do evil. And when the priestly blessing is pronounced, may Yahweh make his face to shine upon you. That is, may Yahweh build his character in you. This is how that takes place. With all of these things we're being taught in the house of Yahweh, that is going to advance us, towards this, to being purple people, to this royal priesthood that we're fixing to go into. So may Yahweh bless your understanding. That's all the time I have. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to the next speaker.
Shabbat Shalom. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you, and you may be seated. Praise Yahweh. If you will, turn to Genesis chapter 2, verse 8. Genesis 2, verse 8. I won't tell you the page number. I think we'll be able to figure that out. Yahweh planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he formed. And so you know what I'll talk about. The house of Yahweh is like a garden. If you look this word garden up in Strong's, it's 1588, and it means fenced, a garden. But it's from word 1598, which means to hedge about, protect, and defend. So Yahweh put man in the protected place from the beginning to protect and defend him. So if you look up the word defend in a dictionary, it means to ward off attack from, guard against assault and injury, to maintain by argument, evidence, uphold. And just so nobody thinks negatively about the word argument, when it's used as a noun, it's a process of reasoning, a series of reasons or a fact for or against a point. So the garden explains that Yahweh put man in a specific place, fenced him in from everything that could harm him, established the Sabbaths for man to be reasoned with, to follow those similitudes, and Yahweh brought forth facts to prove the point that sin causes curses, and righteousness leads to or causes abundant life. So a garden is a fertile and a delightful spot or region, a yard. It really does sound an awful lot like the house of Yahweh. Well, in that scripture, he says, and there he put the man whom he had formed. In the dictionary, definition for put, or some of the definitions, is to move or place so as to get it into a specific location or position. To bring into some relation, like sons and daughters, kings and queens. State, this pure state, pure purple, the purple priesthood, to place in the charge or power of a person or institution. And the last part of the definition of put is to subject to the endurance of suffering of something. And this feast, we've talked about persecution. So within this scripture, within Yahweh putting man in the garden, we can see the work of Yahweh, even as it is today. Turn over to page 938, 2 Timothy. 938, 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12. Yes, and all who live righteously as Yeshua Messiah will suffer persecution. Now if you turn to page 880 in Romans, Romans chapter 8, verses 35 through 39. And if you keep in mind that definition put, I'll let you get to your place there. You know, that suffering of something, the persecution for following the truth. That's what Yeshua was persecuted for, following the truth and teaching the truth. It's not really any different. So Romans 8, 35 through 39. Who will separate us from the love of the Messiah? Will we follow the deceiver, the false prophet, the popes? Who will separate us from the love of the Messiah? Will tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor malachim, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other thing in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of Yahweh, which is in Yeshua Messiah, our King. Praise Yahweh. Those verses are so full of power. If you go back to Genesis 2:7, Genesis 2:7, and Yahweh formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. That word dust for this discussion is the ground. I know dust has an awful lot of different definitions, but today it means the ground. We know that the ground is made up of an innumerable amount of microorganisms. And Yahweh used those microorganisms to create man, to create us. And if you think about a garden, where we started, you know, in turn, we put or plant seeds in the ground. And that's where our food, our sustenance comes from. Our animals will eat grass. And as the animals eat the grass, they turn that grass into meat that sustains man. It's amazing when you watch a cow or a deer or an antelope or a sheep, and you hear them crunching. Boy, they're just grazing, they're eating. And I can't get it out of my head every time I hear that. They're making meat for me. You know, it's amazing how they can eat that green stuff. And I don't know that I'd want to go eat the green stuff. But they eat weeds and seeds and everything else and turn it into meat. It's just an amazing pattern of the house of Yahweh. Because we eat and become more like Yahweh with every bite. The dust of the ground, praise Yahweh, the dust of the ground is just so amazing, the number of things that it can do. It helps purify our water. You know, when it rains, the water goes down in the ground, and I know rocks and everything else has part to do with it, but that soil, that dirt, helps purify the very water that we drink. Yahweh is so wonderfully and awesome that He created us from what sustains us. And He also commanded us to guard that dust. Remember, Pastor taught us a while back what our jobs were as priests and priestesses in the house of Yahweh, and future priests and future priestesses. Our responsibility is to guard and to protect the food supply, to guard the garden. He's given us charge to guard and protect the very things He created us out of. So how do we do that? How do we guard and protect what Yahweh created us from? Turn to page 98, book of Leviticus. Page 98. Yahweh willing, I wrote the right number down. 19:18. Leviticus 19:18. Do not seek revenge, nor bear a grudge against one of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh. Brothers and sisters, it's just so simple what Yahweh expects of us. He expects us to love one another, to care for one another, to treat one another as we would desire to be treated. It's just such a beautiful and a simple plan. If we love one another by keeping Yahweh's laws, what's the promise that Yahweh gives to us? We'll be able to create and maintain life from the very ground that Yahweh created us from. From dust to dust, for life or death, it's all in the dust that derives its power and life from Yahweh. Yahweh promises us, if we practice righteousness, the ability or the authority to live abundantly forever, to be able to give life to even those that are dead, our paycheck or our reward, that's an awesome reward. What does the world offer us besides the wages that the world pays? You know, a paycheck, a fancy truck or car, a big house or even a bigger house. More than likely, a lot more bills. Misery. Every time we see the news, misery. Wars. Confused and ignorant neighbors. And all of that comes, all of that instruction, all of that teaching, all of those negative wages come from what the universals, the popes, have taught and do teach. That you can have freedom from the very laws that bring or puts life into everything. Which reward sounds better? Which paycheck sounds better? It's up to each one of us to make that choice every minute of every day. We can choose to accept and work for the wages that we desire. So where is our desire? Look at page 878, Romans chapter 6. Page 878, Romans chapter 6, verses 20 through 23. Page 878, Romans 6, 20 through 23. For when you were servants to sin, you were free from the control of righteousness. Isn't that what the popes teach? That's the reward that they want to give to everyone that was ever brought to life. But then what benefit did you get from the things of which you are now ashamed? For the end result of those things is death. But now that you have been set free from sin and have become servants to Yahweh, the benefit you reap leads to holiness, and the end result is eternal life. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of Yahweh is eternal life through Yeshua Messiah, our Savior. We have a power that makes us different. I don't know that I would call it peculiar, but it makes us different. We have a power that the universals don't have the authority or the ability or even the knowledge or the wisdom to give to anyone. We have one of the greatest powers ever given to man. It's the power over sin. We have the power or the authority to love one another. Or not. It's why love your neighbor as yourself. It's why love is so important to this great work. We see the growth that we've made since we came to the house of Yahweh. We see the growth in each other. Let's not look so much at the parts of us that aren't perfected yet. When we see those non-perfect parts in the body, why don't we just love more? And within that word love, it includes forgiving one another for anything and everything anyone has ever or will ever do to any of us. We have the power over sin. Every decision we make, we can choose make a righteous choice or make a choice that's not righteous. Every choice we make, what are we going to eat, where are we going to sleep, where are we going to work, all of those things are all derived from choices. And if we allow our choices to be led by the love we have for one another, we can be fruitful and multiply, just as it said in the first chapter of Genesis. That plan of Yahweh is just so amazing. It's so simple, even the youngest child can understand that. Just love one another. And I know it's not always that easy. I'm not easy to love. But you gotta love me. And it's the same thing with each of us. Why would we show respect of persons? Why would we say, well, I can love this one, but Yahweh, don't even ask me to love that one? Why would we even go there in our minds? Remember, we just heard what our thoughts, our very thoughts, can do to our genes. And there will be a test at the end of this on Great Kohan Ali and I's sermon. No, I'm teasing. It's such a simple work that we're asked to do. It's not rocket science to love, to care for one another, to not judge one another negatively, to not have negative thoughts or implications in the choices we make with another brother or sister. It's so simple. Think about how we were 6 years ago. How much love was in us? Or 6 months ago? Or 6 days ago, or even 6 hours ago? We have the next hour to go to. We can love more in the next hour than we did the last hour. All we have to do is make that choice. Turn to page 927, the book of Colossians. 927. I'm really trying not to make the noise with the pages. 927, Colossians 3, starting at verse 1. If then you are risen with the Messiah, seek those things which are from on high, where the Messiah sits at the right hand of Yahweh. Set your understanding and will on things from on high, not on things on the earth. For you are dead, and your life is hid with the Messiah in Yahweh. When Messiah, our life, will appear, then you will also appear with him in glory. Therefore, put to death the evil passions lurking in your members, which are on the earth. What are those evil passions? To not love your neighbor as yourself? It lists a number of things here. We're not going to read all of those. Continuing, verse 6. It is on account of these things that the judgment of Yahweh is coming upon the children of disobedience, among which you also once walked when you lived in them. But now you must also put away all these from your mouth and from your heart and from the very genes that make us up, the DNA. Anger, rage, malice, blasphemy, and filthy language. Do not lie to one another. See, these scriptures tell us how to love one another. Do not lie to one another, since you are putting off the old man with his practices and are putting on the new man who is being renewed in full knowledge, according to the image of him who is creating him. The dust is still at work. The dust is still at work within each and every one of us. Verse 12, therefore, as the elect of Yahweh, holy and beloved, put on compassion, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, being patient with one another, and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, just as the Messiah forgave you, so we also must forgive. And above all these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. Now, I know that word put is italics. It's in italics. Pastor added it. But he added it for a reason. To move or place so as to get it into a specific location or position. To bring into some relation or state. To place in charge in the power of a person, an institution. To subject to the endurance of suffering something. That word put is a very powerful word. Put on love, which is the bond of perfection. When it rains, some of us put on a raincoat. You put it on. When it's muddy, you put on a pair of boots. When your brother or sister steps on your toe or pushes your button, put on love. Put on love. Look back a page, Colossians 1:8. Colossians 1:8. Who also declared to us your love in the law, in the Spirit. We're all here. We know where our love is. We just sometimes might need to show it a little bit more, beyond our very presence. Look at page 920, just a couple pages back, Ephesians 6, 5 through 9. Ephesians 6, 5 through 9. Servants, brothers, sisters, be obedient to those who are your rulers, according to the flesh, with fear, trembling, and in sincerity of heart, as to the Messiah. Not as men pleasers, when their eyes are upon you, but as servants of Messiah, as doing the will of Yahweh from the heart, wholeheartedly rendering service as to Yahweh, and not as to your brother or your sister, knowing that whatever righteous thing anyone does, he will receive the same from Yahweh, whether he is bond or free. There's so many of us. We're all different. We all look different, and we learned why we look different. But we're all the same. Yahweh chose each one of us to be brothers and sisters, to be his sons and daughters for a purpose. And if you start forgetting what that purpose is, let's think about the garden that feeds us, the physical food. And I picked corn because corn is a very unique plant. I want to be careful how I say this, but I think it's the only plant that's self-pollinated. It makes more difference. Let's see how I want to say this. It's not what determines how corn is going to grow. It's not how long the row is. It's how many rows are side by side, so that the wind can blow the corn so that it can self-pollinate. That's what occurs with us. Remember, Pastor taught us about the wind. It's a real thing. It's microorganisms. They're pollinating that corn plant. If it doesn't get pollinated correctly, the kernels don't grow up big and plump and sweet. On an average, an ear of corn, depending on the species and the variety, but on an average, corn has 700 kernels per ear. It can range from 500 to 1,200 kernels. You plant 700, the average. You plant 700 kernels of corn in a field, correctly and properly, and everyone would germinate. I mean, this is the House of Yahweh. Everyone will germinate. That's 700 corn stalks that are going to grow that came from one ear. Each stalk will have, should have, 2 more ears of corn on it. Be fruitful and multiply. So when it gets tough, just think about an ear of corn. Because that sweet corn is awful sweet, just like you. And with that, if you'll all please stand, it's my honor and privilege to have the next leader come up and make the announcements. Yahweh bless.